These delusions aren't healthy, my father told my girlfriend, defending his golden child. I chose her over toxic family. Years later, my brother was arrested. I never wanted to admit it, but I always knew something was wrong with my brother George. From the moment he could walk, there was a darkness in him. A shadow that followed everywhere he went, but nobody else seemed to notice. Not mom, not dad, only me. I was 7 when George killed my pet hamster. I found Peanut lifeless in his cage one morning, neck twisted at an unnatural angle. George was only 5 then. When I ran to my parents crying, they told me it was an accident, that George was just trying to play with it, that I shouldn't have left the cage where he could reach it. My fault, always my fault, that became the pattern of our childhood. George would do something terrible. I would be blamed for it, or worse told I was imagining things, making up stories, seeking attention. Our parents doted on George. He was their miracle baby born after 3 miscarriages, the golden child perfect in every way. I was just there an afterthought. By the time we reached high school, George had perfected his mask. To everyone else, he was charming, popular, the star quarterback with a bright future. But behind closed doors, he was calculating and cruel. He sabotaged my friendships by spreading rumors, stole things from my room and planted them in other people's lockers, did everything he could to isolate me, to make me miserable. I remember when I brought home my first real girlfriend, Melissa. George charmed her immediately, made me look like the awkward, less impressive brother, then in private, told her I'd been talking about getting her drunk to finally seal the deal. She broke up with me that night, believed him without question. That's how good he was, how convincing, and still our parents saw nothing wrong. I left for college the first chance I got, put 3 states between us, built a life where I didn't have to look over my shoulder, where I could finally breathe. That's where I met Nancy. She was everything I never knew I needed. Kind, brilliant, strong. For the first time, someone saw me. Really saw me. Not as George's brother or the family disappointment, just me. We met in an economics class. I noticed her first, the way she challenged the professor's theories with real-world examples, the quiet confidence in her voice, how she never seemed to need validation from anyone else. Our first date lasted 6 hours, just talking about our dreams, our fears, the books that changed us. By the end of the night, I felt like I'd known her my whole life. We dated for 2 years before I finally agreed to bring her home to meet my family. I'd avoided it for as long as possible, making excuses about busy schedules and distance. The truth was I was terrified of exposing her to them, to him. The drive to my parents' house was tense, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. Nancy noticed, placed her hand over mine. "It's going to be fine," she assured me. "They're just people." But they weren't just people. They were the architects of my insecurities, the enablers of George's darkness. I should have trusted my instincts. The moment George laid eyes on Nancy, I saw something shift in him. A predatory gleam I recognized all too well. During dinner, he positioned himself next to her, his arm casually draped over the back of her chair. "Too close. Always too close. You're way too good for my brother," he told her, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "What's a girl like you doing with someone like him?" Nancy laughed it off, uncomfortable but polite. I felt my chest tighten, my hands curl into fists under the table. Later that night, I found him cornering her in the kitchen, standing between her and the door, her back pressed against the counter. Her smile was fixed and wooden. "We should get coffee sometime," he was saying. "I could tell you all the embarrassing stories about my brother that he wouldn't want you to know." When he reached out to touch her hair, I intervened, grabbed his wrist, told him to back off. He just smirked like we were sharing some private joke. "Relax, bro," he said, pulling away. "I'm just being friendly." "Right, Nancy?" We left the next morning. Nancy was quiet during the drive home. Too quiet. "Has he always been like that?" she finally asked. I nodded, the knot in my stomach tightening. "I'm sorry," I said. "I shouldn't have brought you there." She reached over and squeezed my hand. "It's not your fault," but it felt like it was, like I'd failed to protect her from something I should have seen coming. What I didn't know then was that George had already gotten her phone number from my mother, that he'd already started texting her. Innocent messages at first, then increasingly inappropriate, asking about her underwear, telling her he could satisfy her in ways I never could. When she blocked his number, he created new ones, called her in the middle of the night, breathed heavily into the phone when she answered. The final straw came when he sent her a picture of herself sleeping taken through our bedroom window. We lived on the 2nd floor. He must have climbed up to get that shot. I only found out when Nancy showed up at my apartment at 2 a.m. trembling and in tears. She'd been getting calls from unknown numbers, people following her to her car after work, a dead bird left on her windshield. "It's him," she said. "I know it's him." We went to the police, but what I discovered there crushed any hope of justice. The desk sergeant was dismissive from the start, barely glancing at the evidence on Nancy's phone. He took perfunctory notes, his pen barely moving across the page as Nancy described the escalating harassment. "Sounds like a lover's quarrel to me," he muttered, not even trying to hide his disinterest. When I pressed him about the dead bird, the stalking, he leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "Look, I know your brother, captain of the football team, business degree, church every Sunday. You really expect me to believe he's doing all this?" Later in the parking lot, an older officer pulled me aside. His eyes darted around nervously before he spoke. "You should know something," he said quietly. "Your father plays golf with the chief every weekend, and last month, he made a very generous donation toward the department's new cruisers." My stomach dropped. The truth hit me like a physical blow. "How much?" I asked. The officer just shook his head. "Enough. They've been told to handle any complaints about George with appropriate discretion. My advice, get your girlfriend somewhere safe. You won't find help here." That night, I learned what true powerlessness felt like, how the system that was supposed to protect the vulnerable could be so easily corrupted, how money and influence could silence truth. Small towns, they protect their own. Nancy's stalking continued for weeks. George maintained his distance, but his friends were everywhere, watching her, reporting back to him, making her feel unsafe in her own skin. One night, she woke up screaming from a nightmare, thrashing in the sheets, convinced someone was in the room with us. I held her until her breathing steadied, watched as the recognition returned to her eyes as reality replaced the terror. "I can't keep living like this," she whispered. Neither could I. I confronted my parents, showed them the messages, the pictures of the dead bird, the timestamps of the calls. We sat in their pristine living room, the same couch where I'd spent countless afternoons doing homework trying to be invisible, the same coffee table where George had once stabbed me with a pencil for changing the TV channel. The wound had needed 7 stitches. I still had the scar. My mother's face hardened as I shared the evidence. "Are you sure she's not making this up for attention? George would never do something like this. He's always been jealous of you," my father added, though I couldn't remember a single instance where that had been true. "Maybe you're the one behind all this trying to make him look bad." The betrayal cut deep, but it wasn't surprising. They'd always chosen him. Always would. We tried once more. A family intervention. Nancy bravely agreed to face them all to tell them exactly what was happening. How she feared for her safety, how she couldn't sleep at night. It was a disaster. George played the victim, shed tears at the accusation, claimed Nancy had been sending him suggestive messages, then turned around and blamed him when she got caught. "Check her phone," he suggested with feigned innocence. "I bet she deleted all the texts she sent me." My mother nodded sympathetically. My father glared at Nancy. "Young lady," he said, his voice cold. "I think you need professional help. These delusions aren't healthy." Nancy's hands trembled in her lap. I could feel her shutting down beside me, retreating into herself as they ganged up on her. As they did what they'd always done, protected George at all costs. We left that house knowing we would never go back, that we were on our own. The harassment escalated. George started spreading rumors at Nancy's workplace, claimed she'd been stealing medication, nearly cost her her nursing job. It was only her spotless record that saved her. I wanted to confront him directly to make him stop, but Nancy was afraid of what he might do if cornered, of how he might retaliate. "People like your brother," she said, "they feed on confrontation, on knowing they've gotten to you. The only way to win is not to play." When she was offered a position at a hospital across the country, we both knew she had to take it, that we had to leave, start over somewhere safe, somewhere he couldn't reach us. We were packing when the invitation arrived. My cousin's wedding. A family obligation that under normal circumstances, I would have declined, but my grandmother had been diagnosed with late-stage cancer. This might be the last time I'd see her. "We'll go for the ceremony," I told Nancy, "then leave before the reception 3 hours tops." She nodded, though I could see the fear in her eyes. I promised to stay by her side the entire time to keep her safe. Another promise I couldn't keep. The ceremony was beautiful. For a moment, surrounded by extended family who had no stake in the George mythology, I felt almost normal, almost like the person I might have been if I'd grown up in a different home. Nancy excused herself to use the restroom while I chatted with an uncle I hadn't seen in years. I should have gone with her. Should have remembered that George never made idle threats. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Unease crept up my spine. I found them in a deserted hallway far from the reception hall. George had her pinned against the wall, his hand around her throat, her eyes wide with terror. "I told you she was mine," he hissed when he saw me. "She's always been mine." What happened next passed in a blur. Me lunging at him, his fist connected with my jaw. Nancy screamed for help, and then, mercifully, people rushed in. My uncle, 2 of my cousins, a police officer who was a guest at the wedding. They pulled George off us, restrained him as he thrashed and spat vile accusations. For once, there were witnesses. For once, He couldn't twist the narrative. The officer arrested him on the spot. Assault, battery, the beginning of consequences George had avoided his entire life. My parents arrived at the police station an hour later, not to check on Nancy or me, but to bail out George. "This is all a misunderstanding," my mother insisted, not meeting my eyes. "George would never hurt anyone." "She provoked him," my father said, pointing at Nancy's bruised neck. "She's been trying to come between them from the beginning." I saw him slip something to the officer at the desk, an envelope that disappeared quickly into the man's pocket. My blood boiled. Something broke in me then. The last thread of hope that they might someday see the truth, that they might choose me just once. "We're pressing charges," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "And after this, I never want to see any of you again." My mother gasped. My father's face turned purple with rage. "You would choose this girl over your own family?" he demanded. I looked at Nancy, at her quiet strength despite everything. At the woman who had believed in me when no one else did. "She is my family," I replied. "You're just the people who raised me." We moved across the country the following week, changed our phone numbers, started over in a city where nobody knew us, where George's shadow couldn't reach. The case went to court. Despite my parents' best efforts to discredit Nancy, the evidence was overwhelming. Multiple witnesses, security camera footage from the venue. My father tried to bribe the prosecutor, was caught, faced his own charges that were quietly dismissed. Money talks even outside our small town. George received probation, a slap on the wrist that nonetheless tarnished his perfect record, his first official consequence. We got married in a small ceremony with just a few friends. No family started building the life we deserved, one without fear, without looking over our shoulders. There were still bad days, nights when Nancy would wake up gasping for air, convinced someone was following her. Days when I'd see someone who looked like George on the street and my whole body would freeze. Trauma doesn't disappear overnight. It lingers, changes shape, but slowly, we learn to manage it, to not let it control us. We bought a small house with a garden, planted roots both literal and figurative, took back the power he'd stolen from us piece by piece. 3 years passed. We had almost forgotten about them when the call came from a number I didn't recognize. My ad called to tell me that George had been arrested again, this time for domestic violence against his wife. The details were worse than I could have imagined. His wife had been hospitalized with broken ribs and a fractured jaw. This time, there had been witnesses, neighbors who called 911 when they heard her screams. Too many people involved for it to be quietly swept away, but my father had tried anyway. My ad told me how he'd shown up at the police station with an envelope thick with cash, how he'd cornered the arresting officer in the parking lot, speaking in hushed tones about making this go away and protecting the family name. He'd been caught on the station's surveillance cameras. The officer, thankfully from outside our hometown and unswayed by the family's influence, had reported the attempted bribe immediately. My father now faced his own charges, obstruction of justice and attempted bribery of a public official. His reputation, the thing he valued above all else, was in tatters. His law practice hemorrhaging clients by the day. That my mother had finally seen the truth, had finally left my father, was hoping to reconnect with me too little too late. Some bridges once burned can never be rebuilt. Some wounds run too deep to heal. I wished her well but made it clear I wanted no part of that life anymore, that the cycle of abuse and enablement ended with me. Nancy gave birth to our daughter last spring, a tiny, perfect human with her mother's eyes, and I hope none of the darkness that plagued my family tree. I look at her and make silent promises that she will grow up knowing she is loved unconditionally, that she will never be gaslit or manipulated, that she will always be believed. When I hold her, I think about the legacy I inherited, the anger, the fear, the constant vigilance. I think about how those things shaped me, made me who I am. Some scars will always remain, phantom pains from wounds inflicted long ago, but they don't have to define me, don't have to be passed down. Some nights I still wake up in a cold sweat, George's face vivid in my dreams. On those nights, I check on my daughter sleeping peacefully in her crib. I look at my wife's gentle breathing beside me, and I remind myself that we are safe, that we chose each other, that the family we built is stronger than the one I left behind. Nancy never pressures me to deal with my past in any particular way. She understands that healing isn't linear, that some days are harder than others. She just holds my hand through the difficult moments, reminds me to breathe. Last week, a letter arrived from my mother. I recognized her handwriting immediately, the perfect cursive she'd spent hours teaching me at the kitchen table. The same handwriting that had signed countless notes excusing George's absences from school, that had penned grocery lists while ignoring the bruises on my arms. I almost threw it away unopened, but something made me hesitate. Inside was a simple note. No excuses, no attempts to minimize what had happened. Just an acknowledgement of the pain she'd caused, of the son she'd failed to protect, of the grandchild she'd never know. I didn't respond, don't know if I ever will. But for the first time, I felt something close to peace when thinking about her. Not forgiveness. I'm not sure I'll ever get there, but recognition that she too was caught in George's web, that she too was damaged by the life she'd chosen. The shadows of my past grow fainter every day. They'll never disappear completely. That's not how trauma works, but they no longer define me, no longer control me. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away. Cut the poison out of your life even when that poison shares your blood, even when everyone tells you that family should come first no matter what. Because sometimes, family is the most dangerous thing of all. To anyone trapped in the shadow of someone like George, you aren't crazy. You aren't imagining things, and you don't have to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. Find your Nancy. Find people who see you, who believes you, who stands beside you when the world turns its back, and then run. Run as far and as fast as you can. Build something beautiful from the ashes of what you leave behind. I did. And despite everything, I've never once looked back with regret. The hardest lesson I've learned through all of this is that justice isn't guaranteed. Money, power, and familial connections can corrupt even the systems designed to protect us, but that doesn't mean you stop fighting for what's right. Document everything. Build a network of people who know the truth, and understand that sometimes the only way to win against someone like George is to deprive them of what they want most, power over you. For years, I carried the weight of my family's denial, wondered if somehow I was the problem, if maybe I was the one who couldn't see clearly. That's what they wanted me to believe. But gaslighting only works when you're isolated, when you have no one to reflect your reality back to you. No one says, I see it too. The truth has a way of surfacing eventually. No amount of money or influence can keep it buried forever. My father learned that the hard way. George is learning it now. And I'm learning something else entirely. That there is life after trauma. That families can be chosen, built, protected. Those cycles can be broken. My daughter will never know the fear I lived with. She will grow up knowing her worth isn't determined by how useful she is to others, that her voice matters, that her boundaries are sacred. That is my legacy. Not the broken family I left behind, but the whole one I'm creating now. And if you're reading this, wrestling with your own George, your own enabling parents, your own impossible choice, know that there is hope on the other side. It won't be easy. You'll doubt yourself 1,000 times, but one day, you'll wake up and realize the shadow no longer darkens your doorway, that the voice in your head questioning your perception is growing fainter, that you are finally free, and that freedom, it's worth everything.